They were called the walking infernos, and for good reason. In World War II, a flamethrower operator's life expectancy on the battlefield was brutally short. Some veterans claimed mere minutes once combat began. These men carried tanks filled with volatile fuel strapped to their backs. Weapons so terrifying that both friend and foe knew exactly what would happen if a bullet found them. The flamethrower was not a precision weapon. It was a tool of fear. With a single pull of the trigger, it could unleash a stream of fire over 100 feet, consuming bunkers, trenches, and anyone inside. To enemies dug into hardened positions, it was hell itself made portable. To the men carrying it, it was both power and a death sentence. Soldiers quickly learned. When flamethrowers appeared, they changed everything. Targets panicked, defenders broke, and morale collapsed. Which is why, on battlefields from Normandy to the Pacific Islands, enemy troops were ordered to kill the flamethrower operator first, at any cost. It was not just about eliminating a weapon. It was about eliminating terror. But behind the horror lies a story rarely told, of courage, sacrifice, and the crushing psychological weight borne by the men who wielded fire. This is the dark reason why flamethrower operators were hunted first. By the early 1940s, the world was already burning. Across Europe, entire cities lay in ruins from relentless bombing. In the Pacific, thick jungles and volcanic islands became killing grounds where every inch of ground was bought with blood. The geography itself shaped the war. In France, the hedgerows of Normandy created natural fortresses, where German defenders hid in dugouts and bunkers, invisible until it was too late. In the Pacific, islands like Iwo Jima and Peleliu were honeycombed with tunnels and caves, where Japanese troops could vanish underground, immune to artillery and resistant to airstrikes. Conventional weapons often failed against these defenses. Grenades and rifles could not reach men buried deep in concrete or rock. Artillery blasts left them shaken but alive. To crack these strongholds, armies needed something that could seep into hidden spaces and force defenders out, or burn them alive where they stood. That something was the flamethrower. For the Allies, the stakes were immense. Breaking through meant moving one step closer to Berlin or Tokyo. Every bunker cleared shortened the war, saved lives, and shifted momentum. For the Axis powers, holding their ground meant slowing the inevitable advance, buying time, and bleeding the enemy dry. In these brutal arenas, the flamethrower became more than a weapon. It was a psychological hammer. It promised not just destruction, but annihilation in the most terrifying form imaginable. And that is why the men who carried it became both feared and doomed. The flamethrower was not born in World War II. Its roots stretched back to the First World War, when German engineers introduced the Flammenwerfer on the Western Front. In 1915, terrified British and French soldiers described jets of fire arcing across no man's land, reducing dugouts into blazing coffins. It was crude, unreliable, and as deadly to the operator as to the target, but it left an impression. Armies had glimpsed the future of psychological warfare. 2 decades later, as the world plunged once again into conflict, commanders remembered. Both Axis and Allied powers dusted off the concept, refining it with new designs, stronger tanks, and longer range. The Germans fielded their Flammenwerfer 35 and later the lighter 41, while the Americans produced the M1 and its successor, the M2. Each nation trained a small, specialized cadre of soldiers in their use. Men often chosen for their physical endurance and willingness to accept the most dangerous assignment. Training was minimal but brutal. Operators drilled on how to assemble and fire the weapon, how to switch fuel tanks under pressure, how to aim not for the man, but for the space he occupied. They were warned, too, of the dangers. The tanks could rupture, the lines could clog, the fuel could ignite prematurely. Few forgot the first time they felt the heat roar past their shoulder, the blast so violent it scorched the earth. Defenders prepared as well. In Normandy, German troops dug bunkers into hedgerows, camouflaging them until they looked like harmless mounds of earth. In the Pacific, Japanese engineers carved entire underground complexes, weaving tunnels that stretched for miles. They believed no conventional force could dig them out. They believed wrong. Intelligence, as always, was incomplete. Allied planners often underestimated the depth of enemy defenses. Reports described dugouts, when in reality there were vast subterranean fortresses. The soldiers who would carry flamethrowers into battle did not know the true scale of what awaited them. On the eve of combat, the atmosphere was a strange mixture of silence and dread. Men whispered in foxholes, adjusting their gear, checking straps and seals. The flamethrower operators, weighed down with nearly 70 pounds of volatile fuel and hardware, moved carefully, feeling like marked men before the first shot was even fired. When the order finally came, it was not shouted but breathed, a signal passed down the line, almost reverent. And then the first flame was unleashed. The first contact was never clean. It was mud, confusion, and fear. On the beaches of Normandy, flamethrower operators landed with the first waves. The sea was red with tracer fire and churned by exploding shells. Many never made it off the sand. Those who did found the hedgerows thicker than they'd been told, the German bunkers deeper, the fields crisscrossed with hidden trenches. Every step forward felt like walking into an invisible barrel of a gun. In the Pacific, the story was no less brutal. At Peleliu, Marines staggered off their landing craft into a furnace of heat and gunfire. The island's coral ridges tore boots and cut hands raw, while Japanese machine guns cracked from pillboxes hidden in the rock. The tunnels that intelligence had dismissed as minor sprawled into vast labyrinths. A machine gun nest silenced in the morning could blaze back to life by dusk. The enemy simply melted into the earth and re-emerged elsewhere. The flamethrower operators moved under constant threat. Their bulky tanks clinked with each step, making them targets even before they fired. Snipers searched for the glint of a nozzle, machine gunners for the silhouette of a tank. More than once, an operator fell before he could unleash a single burst, his weapon exploding in a violent inferno. And yet, there were flashes of hope. At Normandy, a single flame jet drove German troops fleeing from a stone farmhouse, clearing the way for infantry to push deeper inland. At Iwo Jima, Marines cheered as a bunker that had pinned them down for hours went silent under a blast of fire. For a moment, victory felt close, the tide turning. But the enemy adapted quickly. Germans dug firing slits low to the ground, where flames could not reach. Japanese defenders rigged tunnels with traps, luring flamethrower teams into kill zones. Every small victory was met with brutal counterattacks, and every step forward demanded another sacrifice. The battlefield seemed to whisper a warning. Each cleared nest revealed another. Each fleeting triumph came at the cost of men who carried fire on their backs. The soldiers knew it. Deep down, they could feel it in their bones. The real horror had not yet begun. The battlefield erupted into fire. It began with a roar, the guttural hiss of pressurized fuel igniting at the nozzle. A jet of flame arced forward, brighter than the sun, curling and writhing as it swallowed the darkness of a bunker. The air itself seemed to burn. Inside, defenders screamed. Their shouts were drowned by the crackling of timber, the popping of ammunition cooking off, the choking smoke that poured from every opening. Some tried to crawl out, only to be cut down by rifles and machine guns waiting outside. Others stayed underground, suffocated where they lay. For the operator, every second felt like eternity. The tanks on his back weighed him down, heavy with both promise and doom. He squeezed the trigger in bursts, 3, maybe 4 seconds at most, careful not to exhaust his limited fuel. When the flame struck a target, the heat seared his face even from yards away. The smell was unforgettable, burning fuel, scorched earth, and flesh. Around him, the chaos was unrelenting. German MG-42s tore through the hedgerows, their barrels glowing red. Mortars rained down, shaking the ground with every impact. In the Pacific, Japanese soldiers charged from tunnels in bonsai attacks, their screams echoing through the jungle. Some hurled themselves directly at the flamethrower operators, desperate to kill the man who carried hell on his back. The flamethrower was devastating, but it was not invincible. Fuel lines clogged, igniters failed, one misfire, and the operator was left holding a useless weight in the middle of a battlefield that wanted him dead. Worse still, a single bullet to the fuel tanks could turn him into a living torch. Men knew it and fought on anyway. Infantry squads worked in pairs with their flamethrower operators. Riflemen shielded them, laying down suppressing fire. Engineers cleared paths through mines and barbed wire. It was a brutal choreography, each man playing his role in the desperate dance of survival. The defenders adapted. Germans dug deeper, constructing concrete pillboxes with narrow slits too small for flame to enter. Japanese soldiers used the labyrinth of tunnels to flank and encircle, emerging behind American lines. But even they could not ignore the weapon's terror. When the flame appeared, hearts faltered, resistance crumbled, and still the cost was staggering. An operator might clear a bunker, only to be cut down seconds later. Another would burn out a nest of machine guns, then collapse under the weight of exhaustion and heat. The average lifespan of a flamethrower man in open combat was brutally short. They knew it, their comrades knew it, and still they pressed forward. By late afternoon, the landscape was unrecognizable. Normandy's hedgerows smoldered, blackened skeletons of trees marking where bunkers once stood. In the Pacific, coral ridges glowed as if the island itself were aflame. The air was thick with smoke, screams, and the buzzing of flies already gathering. And then, the tipping point. A massive cave system on Peleliu, once thought impenetrable, collapsed under coordinated blasts of flamethrowers and satchel charges. German strongpoints along the Norman countryside went silent, one by one, their defenders either dead or broken. The realization spread like wildfire through the ranks. The enemy's will to resist was cracking. The fire had done more than destroy. It had broken men's spirits. The outcome was no longer in doubt. When the flames finally guttered out, silence returned. But it was the kind of silence that only follows catastrophe. The bunkers were no longer strongholds. They were charred tombs. The hedgerows of Normandy smoldered with the stench of burned earth and bodies. On the Pacific Islands, black smoke poured from collapsed cave mouths, marking graves that would never be dug. The cost was staggering. Entire squads were reduced to a handful of survivors. Flamethrower operators, so vital in the assaults, rarely lived to see the next day. Many had burned through their tanks, their strength, and finally their lives. For every strongpoint cleared, dozens of Allied infantry lay still in the dirt, victims of machine guns, mines, or the cruel chance of being in the wrong place at the wrong moment. And yet, the ground was taken. Normandy's defenses began to buckle, opening the way inland toward the liberation of France. In the Pacific, caves once thought untouchable fell, island by island, as American forces pushed ever closer to Japan. The immediate result was progress, bloody, costly, but undeniable. For the defenders, the end was even grimmer. German soldiers left alive surrendered in disbelief, shaken by what they had endured. Japanese garrisons often chose death instead, refusing to emerge from their fiery graves. Individual fates were scattered in tragedy and heroism. Some flamethrower men received medals for extraordinary bravery, though many were awarded posthumously. Their comrades remembered them not as nameless specialists, but as men who carried the heaviest burden into the fire. By the time the smoke cleared, one truth was obvious. The battle was won, but at a price so terrible it left even victors hollow. History remembers the flamethrower with a shiver. It was never just a weapon, it was a symbol of fear itself. For the men who carried it, the burden was twofold. They bore the terror of their enemies and the near certainty of their own deaths. In the short term, the weapon was brutally effective. It cracked fortifications, flushed out tunnels, and shifted battles that might otherwise have dragged on for weeks. But its legacy outlived the wars. The psychological scars it left behind, both on those who used it and those who faced it, helped shape how nations thought about warfare. Even as technology advanced, few weapons carried such stigma. After World War II, many armies quietly retired their flamethrowers, replacing them with explosives, rockets, and precision strikes. Fire had done its work, but it had also crossed a line humanity hesitated to tread again. Culturally, the image of a man wielding fire became iconic. From war films to veterans' memories, it remains a reminder of both courage and horror. The flamethrower is remembered less as a tool of victory, and more as a symbol of the extremes war can push mankind toward. And yet, buried in that memory is a lesson. Victory bought through terror carries its own cost. Because once you unleash fire, you cannot control what it consumes.